Want autonomy and responsibility to make decisions and set expectations at your workplace? How does one manage up? Or is it leading up to influence the management chain? Or is it managing across stakeholders from different organizations? Join the next discussion and learn a strategic toolbox to systematically identify and manage situations in your favor. Join the Grow Your Mind series brought to you by GROUNOW. Today we have our guest speaker, Andy Betts, who, having gotten to know Andy recently, I'm blown away by what he does purposefully to help client-facing engineers, whether it be external or internal, work with their stakeholders more effectively. And he has certain ways of doing it that are very potent and strong. So definitely check Andy's work out. He's collaborated with us on the Managing Up survey responses. Fantastic, person to work with. So thank you, Andy, for joining us. Maybe a few words from you before we get started.
Well, thanks, Suraj. What you always do when you introduce me is make me so embarrassed I can barely speak.
you deserve all the praise. Yeah.
So, yeah, as many of you know, in fact, my speciality is communicating with clients. So managing up is very much in line with that, because you're always in a position with clients of influencing where you've not got any hierarchy through an given to you by an institution. And so I've been very happy to work on this topic that Suraj suggested a few weeks ago, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you. All right, without further ado, let's get into setting the context and getting engaged here. I have two introductory questions for you, Andy, just to get us warmed up here. So we did send out a survey, and if for those who haven't checked out the survey, we'll resend the link to it. Andy's also comprised his response in a profound article, so you should have read this. If not, you can always do that later. But we sent out the survey, and we wanted to ask you, what did you notice about managing up? Like what it meant to those who took the survey? And how does it compare to your experience working with clients worldwide? Can you start us off with that question, please?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned managing up and working with clients are very similar things, in the sense what you're trying to do is influence, and nobody's given you power through an institution. But the thing I noticed most about the replies from the survey was how nuanced they were and how encouraging they were. They encouraged me to see that people have moved a long way away from simple binary concepts like you're either a manager or you're a worker, you're either a leader or a follower. That kind of thing seems to have gone. And so we're having a much more interesting debate then.
I see. Then, having observed that, how would you comprise, or how would you define what does it mean to manage up?
Oh, my definition personally is quite simple. It is that you are trying to influence people who are above you in the hierarchy. I distinguish that from managing across, where you're trying to influence your peers. And obviously, we use the term managing or simply leading when we're generally referring to reports. So the definition I find quite simple. How you do it, is something again. So
I see. But again, there might be like a spectrum of perspectives for managing up, right? So you've heard what people think. At a 30,000 feet view, you kind of mentioned what managing up is. I think in some cases, people feel defeated. They feel that there is no point in managing up. They're isolated, so all the negatives, that's one. Some, they feel they're engaged and they can do it, but perhaps they could use some help. How can they refine their strategy? How can they refine their approach? And there have been some cases where people said that managing up does not apply to them. And there might be many genuine and non-genuine reasons. Do you mind helping us unwrap those three situations? And I can go through them one by one, if that helps as well.
It's okay. I think I got them. I mean, as you say, once you've got the idea of managing up, being influencing above, thousands of examples come up, because you might be trying to influence your boss's expectations. You might be trying to get them to change their strategy. You might be doing all sorts of things. Now, some people, as you pointed out, feel that this is just not worth the effort. And they perhaps, they just want a quiet life, and so it doesn't apply to them. Okay, well, that's okay. So I think that's what you were alluding to start with. Then there, people think it's not necessary. Now, hold on a sec. So people that feel kind of defeated and this feeling of defeating in isolation implies really that you've tried once or twice and you've had such a bad experience that you're not going to try again. Okay. Which is unfortunate, and I think that still happens because you still find people and organizations that won't accept people lower down having any influence. They're command and control, and unfortunately that still exists. But I think more and more we're seeing that it's a difficult topic, managing up. Influencing where you've really not got any control is tricky. But people are asking questions like, how can I do it better? How can I do it faster? Why am I not getting what I set out to get? So I think we should concentrate on that one because it's the more positive.
I hear you.
It's where we can,
And even the second one, where people think that they are engaging, but they need that extra help. Maybe they think that they're doing whatever they have in line of sight or what they know, but there could be other strategies out there that would multiply and maybe minimize the things that are inefficient to do. Multiply the good and minimize the bad. I think in that case, before we even get to it, where does the mindset come from, or what's the root of the problem? You talked about maybe this chain of command is that kind of I'm in charge, I'm in command mindset. Is there anything else that causes this to become complex? Is it from the individual side, more from the management? What has been your observation?
It's a nice question. There's a couple of things come to mind. One is on the side of the N+1, N+2, the people you're trying to influence, and the other one is on the side of the influencer. On the side of the N+1, N+2, very often the problem is time. We are working in organizations that are more and more stressed. It seems to be a trend that we can't deny. And therefore, a lot of managers would like to take the time to listen more to their folk. And they really can't find the bandwidth to do it. So you can find, individual contributors attempting to pass on information, to have an influence above them. And they're being pushed back, not because there is some, incompatibility in values or there's some idea they shouldn't be doing it, simply because there's no bandwidth. Everybody's rushing too much. They have to just send commands. On the other side, the other one is interesting. I think things get tricky if the person trying to influence judges their success only by whether they get what they set out to get. So if your only goal is to resist, say, for example, push back on a request. Let's say you've been asked to prepare some presentation for the next day and you want to push back on the request. You make your best efforts, and in spite of that, your boss absolutely insists that you do this work by the next day. So you didn't get what you wanted, right?
Correct.
But if you pushed back in a very correct way, courageous way, in a way that was not offensive, you probably had a very positive influence on the relationship you have with your boss. Okay. And so I'll just say some of the difficulties that people announce can be the natural fact they're doing better than they thought. They are having a positive effect on the relationship they've got with people above them in the
Hmm.
hierarchy, but they're not always getting what they want. And so if you judge everything by, did I get what I want? Yeah, well, things are going to seem even more difficult than they really are.
I think it's so true what you said. In my experience, people typically tell you what to do, but not how to do it. And that's the exciting part that I'm excited actually for the people on the call to see some of the tips and tricks how to actually do what you're saying to do. So I think that is key
Mm.
here. And the second thing is also trade-offs. Like you said, we are perhaps happy only when we get what we expect, but then there are times where you got to have trade-offs and identify what are your non-negotiables versus what you don't mind slipping, right? And you can have
Mm.
your cake and eat it. So let's continue here to set more context and, to my excitement, share some of your uh, tricks and tips to the folks who are dialed in. All right. We also learned that managing across, not just up, managing across is imperative, especially when influence is necessary, right? And that
Mm.
the topic about institutional power, when that is absent, this becomes even more key. So, question number one: how to especially be sensitive to feelings when managing across? When I talk about feelings, it's people, it's projects, dependencies, expectations. So for managing across, how would you address that?
Well, I think it's equally valid for managing up as well.
Uh,
You're often in a situation where you need to take a lead in some way.
mm-hmm,
So let's say working on a project and you really feel things should be done in a certain way and you're working with two or three peers. So you're taking a kind of leadership attitude, and perhaps other people feel that they should be in charge, or at least, the deciding. And if you sense that, it really is, in my view, it's very important to not only say what you want to say, but explain your intention in terms of, I really want this project to work and I feel that I've got something to say, are you willing to listen, kind of thing.
mm-hmm,
So in those situations that are a bit sensitive, where you think there could be some sense that you're treading on other people's toes, either your boss or your peers,
mm-hmm,
um, focusing first of all on getting uh, some endorsement for, or acknowledgement, some permission for what you want to say is a good idea. And it comes a little bit back to what I was saying earlier. If you focus too much on what you're trying to get, so in other words, pushing your point of view and go for
mm-hmm.
that too fast, it's then that you tend to get into trouble. And if you start off by saying, I really would like to contribute something along these lines,
Mm-hmm.
are we okay with that? Before you dive in with your great ideas, that can that's
But
that's what I see a lot.
I'm very much guilty myself of that, right? We want to talk about our war stories. I want to say this is how you got to do it. This is the right way, and I'm eager as an engineer to get to the solution. But I think you're saying something different where if you're chasing the solution, you're actually prolonging the outcome. Is that another way to
Yes,
put
that's
it?
right.
Another,
That's exactly
yeah.
right. Yeah. If you chase too hard, you do tend to go into these situations thinking, my objective is this. I want my point of view to be heard, or I want to not have to do this certain thing, or I want to get this from my manager. That's the kind of thing that you've got in your mind. But if you go for that too directly, it can easily take a lot longer than you thought, because you meet resistance.
Yeah, and I think that reminds me of your book. You talk about the hurry monster or the short circuit
Yeah,
monster,
that's
and
the
that's
fella. Yeah,
right.
yeah,
And I think that is
yeah.
so true because haste makes waste. We say it, but it's very true in the workplace, especially with goals. Everyone has goals. You got to meet
Mm,
those goals, and every company has their
mm,
own way of managing it. So this pressure to meet a deadline, and if you don't, then it's going to weigh on your shoulders. Uh, and I think there's a really good question that's come on the chat in regards to autonomy. And is promoting autonomy good in the workplace? And if so, how to promote it? And what are the ways to encourage autonomy in your team to get the best results? And I think it's autonomy
Mm.
with more ingredients. But before I lead you in a particular direction, I want to hear from your point. How does autonomy play into managing up? Because you're still working with others, and autonomy is the opposite. So maybe add some
Well,
color here.
the way I would kind of read it was, if you're a leader of a team, for example, it's a great idea to encourage autonomy
Mm-hmm.
in your collaborators, because you're fully exploiting their potential. You're making your life a lot easier. You're making delegation a lot easier. And the way to do that is to make the space that will allow them to manage up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit what we were saying earlier. If you're too busy, if you can't listen to people as a leader, as a team leader, then you're cutting off the possibilities for your collaborators to manage up, which frustrates them and makes you as a team less productive. So that was how that's how I kind of think of autonomy in this context. Now, I don't know if that answers the person's question.
I see. We'll wait for a response in chat, but I do have follow-up to that. In
Yeah.
the instance where you have someone who just became a first-time manager and they've been an engineer, they've been
Right.
doing it their way, and this comes back to autonomy. Now, as a leader, you cannot be the one solving the problem. You might believe that you can solve it faster and better than the team can, but I think that's when you got to give autonomy. And that is typically a challenge with a lot of first-time managers. Is that correct in your observation?
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely. We're straying a little bit from the subject, but I can bring you back because, I wrote that article last week or the week before, and the subject of that was different postures, either if you're in the leader position or the individual contributor position. And my point was in the article is that there are many possibilities for your stance, the way you tackle a job. And this has been advocated for a long time in the area of management. For a long time, since the 60s, people have been saying, be situational. If you are managing a team, there'll be sometimes when you need to teach people, there'll be sometimes when you need to mentor them, other times you need to just get down in the trenches and do stuff. Okay. Situational leadership has been a buzzword for a long time.
Right.
And it occurred to me, working with different people, that exactly the same argument applies to individual contributors. Depending on what you're asked to do or what you think is the right thing to do, you need to take on different postures. Now, as you come back to what you said, the thing is, when you're an individual contributor, very often the posture you adopt is problem solver. Is somebody's asked me to do something, I go and do it. And when you become a leader, that's the posture you automatically gravitate to. It's the one you're most comfortable with. And the trick is to learn how to fit in comfortably into the other postures. I can show you a couple of graphs that I put into the article in a minute, and we'll look at that. That's for later, I think.
I'm very excited actually seeing that. So I do have a few more before we jump into that. And
sure.
I think people are going to be excited. Hopefully I'm drumming up the right expectation here. But we have a baseline and context established, which I believe. But before we progress to my favorite part, can you articulate all of that you've talked and in a way that we can understand why is it important to manage up before we figure out how to do it? If you were to summarize, why is it important to manage up?
I think it's important for the team and the organization in which you work, because if that organization or that team is full of people that can manage up, in other words, people with a good level of autonomy, it will be infinitely more performant. Well, it's French, isn't it? effective. That's right. So that it's really important for the organization. It's really important for individual people, because it's very hard to work comfortably if you don't feel that your view is being heard, if you
Mm-hmm.
can't set people's expectations so that you're working against reasonable deadlines,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can't make full use of your expertise. Because sometimes you find you've got expertise that is really relevant to your managers. For example, I put a couple of examples in the paper. A very trivial one is culture. I mean, maybe you've traveled the world and know a lot about Japanese culture.
Mm.
And for some reason, your managers are actually in contact with Japan for the first time in their lives. And if you don't give them some hints about what to do, they're going to make a right fist of it. They're not going to do very well at all, because there are a lot of different traps you can fall into when you go into that culture. And so you want to make best use of your experience and your expertise, and it'd be very frustrating if you couldn't. So it's important on these two sides, for the team and the organization and for the individual.
I see. And I think situationally it changes, and that's what you're talking about, situational leadership. But I think now is perhaps a good time to show some of those slides, which kind of talks about if you're in different situations, how do you approach it? Because we can talk about things hypothetically, but those examples I think are pretty profound. I'm going to stop sharing and let me know when you can start sharing at your end.
Sure. Okay. So the idea behind actually showing these, you're not allowing participant sharing, Suresh.
Let me go ahead and do that.
So the idea of drawing, if you like, a number of postures for leaders and for individual contributors was really in response to the fact that this managing up thing is anything but trivial. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the keys to it is being able to navigate around these possibilities in a flexible way. And before you can do that, of course, you need to understand them. So let me see. Yeah, so these are the leadership postures. So as I say, the idea of situational leadership has been around for a long time. And one way of viewing the leadership postures is in the idea of two axes. So are you leading with a view to getting decisions and actions made, or are you trying to find stuff out, understand stuff? That's the horizontal axis. And then leading is about people. So are you trying to develop people, which is the north axis, or are you trying to just get productivity? So in other words, get the expertise out of people and get things done. So we started with the problem solver, which is what you inherit from your days as being an individual contributor. If you want to get your team to understand more, be more knowledgeable for a particular task, you train them to do stuff you can do. Simple enough. Okay. If your concern is more to develop people and give them more autonomy, so not simply follow a set of instructions, but to develop them in a professional context, a mentoring posture is more relevant. And if you're really focused on developing the person rather independently of any professional context, then you need to coach. Okay. And these different postures imply slightly different approach. Okay. So bottom left, deductive approach, you're a subject matter expert. You advise, and the end result is that you get stuff fixed. Okay. Well, when you're a leader, that doesn't necessarily mean you do the work, but you will drive the work in great detail. Okay. A trainer will teach people how to do something. So that's methodology. You direct them to use a certain methodology so that they gain new capabilities. Right? A mentor uses their expertise in an area and also their network, their contacts, all that kind of stuff, in order to guide somebody so that they can develop in that domain. And then a coach is catalytic. So a coach tries to trigger development in a person. So they're the leadership postures. Now, an individual contributor also, has a number of things. I mentioned the problem solver. On the ideas information side, they are often called to work stuff out. So that's an analysis kind of role. Okay. I didn't really explain the axis, but the north-south axis is to the bottom is where you're working in a completely stable context and you either decide to do things or you're asked to do things. The northern axis is something's changing, a new project, a new role, something like that. And this will challenge an individual contributor to pathfind. So something completely different has come up. They use their expertise to find a new way through it. And if you go over to the right, where it's not so much fixes and solutions that are called for, but ideas and information, then they want to be in a strategizer kind of role. Okay. So these are, this is an invention, but I believe the value of it is it gives us a vocabulary to work with. They are not, absolutely, it's not the absolute truth, but I think it's a useful nomenclature, a useful vocabulary for us. And therefore, there you see the 4 different approaches: down-to-earth approach for problem solving, analytical approach for analyzing, obviously. If you're a pathfinder, you're using trial and error to find a way of doing something. If you're a strategizer, it's more imaginative. Now, coming back to managing up, some of managing up will be done with one of these 4 approaches that we're looking at. Okay. And in these cases, actually setting expectations, pushing back on things that are unreasonable and so on, are examples of ways of managing up. The leadership postures that we looked at earlier are also relevant to individual contributors, though, because some of the things you want to do when you're managing up involve teaching people, right? Or involve problem solving at a different level, not at the level that you are normally doing as part of your everyday job. Sometimes it involves coaching people and so on. So that an individual contributor has got quite a big number of possibilities. And this is what it's all about: finding the right hat, the right position to work from, and if necessary, explaining to people why you're taking that approach, that attitude, that posture, in the particular circumstances.
I see.
So I hope that is a bit of fuel for thought.
I think it is. And correct my understanding here. I think we might be already doing some of it, but we might be mixing up a different set of postures. And that's where perhaps we're not as effective as we could be. So given a problem, if we are in multiple parts of that graph and we're trying to approach it, and I think that's where inefficiencies creeps in. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think it's like a lot of things. If you have got more ability to stand back and analyze what you're doing, so you've got words to think with, because we do think in words, right? So that those concepts allow you to step back and say, well, yeah, I guess in that circumstance, I was taking a bit of a, let's say, a mentoring role, but nobody understood me. And that makes you think, perhaps I should have made it clearer or something. So the benefit of having things laid out graphically like that, I think, is it gives you some structure to think from. So, we've discussed this, you and I, and with a couple of your colleagues as well. And the range of managing up examples that came out of those discussions was enormous. So there's no magic formula, right? was that realization that led me to think at a completely different level. There's no magic formula, that there is no one way to do it, but each person can work out their own favored tactics if they've got the tools to think with. And this is what these kind of diagrams give you.
Wonderful. I don't see any immediate questions on the chat, but did want to ask one in regards to a specific scenario, and then leveraging the two charts that you had, and then like figuring out how that would transpire. For instance, your manager doesn't understand what it takes to apply a new software feature. He or she might have been an IC or engineer in the past, but now there's a new feature that's coming in. The tools have changed, the vendors are different, and even the complexity, while they might be largely similar, there are also equal amount of differences. Now, a goal is being identified as in the next quarter, this feature has to come out, but you have better intuition that this is more than just a quarter, maybe two, perhaps even 3 quarters out. And then there are dependencies. There's more complexity to it. If this is enough, can you go back to the graph and identify for all of us which quadrant do you operate in this particular scenario? Both from an IC posture and then apply it back to the leadership posture.
Okay, so what I'd suggest is you're going to be starting off probably somebody's tasked you with, doing something with the software within a month, and it's going to take 3 months, and you would have been in the problem solver and analyzer situation to start with, okay, and that's what made you realize that, this is going to take a bit longer than people think, okay. And this is the point at which you probably need to go up here, and you need to take a more of probably a trainer, maybe approach with your boss, because from the way you described it, I think probably the boss needs to understand, they need to bring their knowledge up to date in order to see what the right deadline is, what the right decisions are, and so on. Now, this throws up one of the trickiest things and most common challenges with managing up is the boss may not agree with this too much. They may think, I know exactly what to do. That's all it takes, and so on. And this is the tricky bit, and this is why I say the hurry monster, needs to be put to bed. You need to first of all focus on getting permission to bring the boss up to date and make sure they're okay with that before you dive into telling them loads of stuff what to do. But you do need to get into a kind of instructive approach. You need to, from the way things sound, they need to better understand what's possible and what's not possible, and why. It's a bit of a posture dance, because you start off on a couple of the individual contributor postures, and you probably need to end up in a more of a leadership posture in order to influence your boss.
I want to try to go deeper, and if this needs to be another different topic for discussion, that's also great, but address it maybe at a high level. Easier said than done. You go to your boss, and the boss doesn't have time, or the boss is just not understanding. And in some cases, it can be toxic and unhealthy, where the boss just doesn't want to engage. There might be genuine reasons. Maybe they're having a bad day. I'd like to give benefit of the doubt. But then there's some ingenuine reasons where they just are not necessarily fun to work with, right? I'm not taking a different stance at them. You want to go and train them, but they are not welcoming of that. What do you do then? What's the immediate next step? There could be a long-term solution. There's always, other opportunities. But before we go, let's try to exhaust all options before we go to something dramatic. What else can we do?
Well, if they're not listening, you're a bit stuck, right? So you probably need to establish some kind of record for a start. I mean, we're getting down to real pragmatic stuff. um, you're probably being pushed into defending yourself in advance a little bit. So you need to keep informing, using whatever means they'll accept, which means reporting, regularly, making it very clear that that you are not sabotaging anything. You're putting as much effort in as possible, and you're progressing at a certain rate, in the hope that eventually they'll come around to saying, oh yeah, I can see this is not advancing. I need to understand why. And then you can go back in and perhaps, take the opportunity then to get more into a teaching stance. But if, your efforts have been pushed, refused, all you can do is get on with stuff and wait for an opportunity, wait for an opening, I think.
I see. How about also arming and preparing ourselves? For instance, are we actively listening ourselves? Are we asking questions to the boss, showing that we are interested in hearing a different perspective and not stubborn about what we are saying is the right thing? That perhaps helps. What else like that can help? How can we take control on things that are under our control? Like I can control my emotions and feelings and how I learn. I cannot control how someone else feels, imagine things. So what else can we do to help ourselves? What advice do you have for us?
No, you make a very good point. No, I see where you're going with it. I agree with you. In any situation, I mean, a lot of listening can only help. So getting stuck on the idea that we are right and everybody else is wrong is not a good idea. And we can help ourselves by getting away from that. And one possibility is the one I set out with, which is, we can see and we know that things can't be done in that amount of time. There could be very good reasons why the deadline has been set for what it is. And perhaps the boss knows that it's almost impossible, but there are still very good reasons for doing it. And that's what we need to find out and understand.
I think that's very key what you said, because do you feel that the boss, like you said, the boss does know it's unreasonable, but there might be other pressure points that's on the boss that they're not vocalizing for any amount of reason? Not that it's right or wrong, but the very fact that you ask perhaps releases some sort of steam or pressure. The fact that someone cares, the boss also feels more at ease to feel safe. And that's my mantra. Is if you're a leader, make people around you feel safe. That goes even towards your own boss who is supposed to manage you. So could you dive a little bit more into how that safety net helps in this case in managing up, in getting your point across, in winning, figuring out, asking questions? How does that help?
Well, I think what you're talking about is trust, really, isn't it?
Correct.
So
at the end of the day,
you're talking about trust. You're faced with a situation that doesn't seem logical, so you push back. Your boss doesn't respond as you'd hoped, and if you trust him, then you're automatically going to trying to understand why he's pushing back so much, because you'd have expected him to be responsive to your request. And so it really does come back to that. And healthy teams work well because that trust exists and managing up as expected. And kind of as you're raising a very good point, because part of managing up is also trusting the people above you, so that again, it's not all about getting the result that you originally set out to get, right?
Yeah.
You push for your boss to better understand your job because they've set the deadlines all wrong, and you may not get that. That may not be what you get. What you may get is a better understanding of their constraints, of what they're doing, which is a benefit in the long run.
Yeah, I think I'm just hearing the same thing coming up again. Don't chase the end outcome.
Yeah.
Explore. That's definitely the case. There is another question, Andy, and this is actually very near and dear to me, especially because of the person who asked this question as well. would finding allies also be a helpful task? And I just want to give a context as to why this is near and dear to me, because I find the person who actually asked this question as a very strong ally when I was working back in corporate.
Mm.
And so I know personally that it helped me. It helped not just come to more informed, effective decisions, but it made work more enjoyable. So I'm going
Mm.
to throw the question still right back at you. Would finding allies also be helpful, and how?
Right. And how is the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because yes, yes to the first part. How is, I completely agree with you. And I've found over the years that working with others and being able to exchange with others about these type of issues is incredibly helpful. And this is one of the reasons why I go for things like the diagrams we looked at earlier,
Mhm.
because if you share with somebody some of these concepts, then it's so much easier to discuss, what happened. You're on the same wavelength with people very, very quickly. And so for my sins, I teach and I coach. And part of coaching, part of the ethics of coaching requires that you have supervisors and you have people that you can do best practices exchanges with. And it's just incredibly helpful. So coaching is a lot about influencing, of course.
Mhm.
And you're very often stuck. And so talking to your peers about your stuckness, things you're having trouble with, very often allows you to get new insights and so on. It's not a question when you say working with with other people. It's not just a question of kind of using them to surround your boss with, a whole host of people that agree with your point of view. It's also just a question of exchanging with people in order to get inspiration on how to tackle things. For example, what you just pushed me to see a moment ago, your problem might be, well, the boss has not understood that this deadline is impossible, and he won't understand when I try and explain. And you pointed out, well, have you tried asking him why, that deadline is pushed? And it's by working with your peers that you can start to see things differently. So it's really incredibly important.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm excited. There are more questions coming up, and there's another one again. Some great people that I've had the pleasure of working with. So I'm very thankful that they're here, making good use of their time, learning some things and asking questions. So actually helping us back. The next thing is, do you also have to show that you are trustworthy? Build a good reputation so your efforts are more meaningful. Show you have a reason to be listened to. I think
Mm-hmm.
this is profound. And I know the person saying this did every single bit of this and much more.
Mm.
So I think these are all seems obvious, but how
Yeah.
do we make the obvious part and parcel of our daily actions? It might be within us. I think a lot of the times we keep things within us. We don't show it. Like, we say, hi, how are you doing? We genuinely mean that, hopefully in the mornings or whenever we do get to talk. But these seem obvious, but how do we show it? How do we make it obvious?
Yeah. What comes to mind, honestly, is a lot of things that you have to avoid doing that are very
Mm,
tempting to do. Like we talked about one, which is jumping straight in, going, being driven by hurry monsters and going to get something all the time. That is something we need to avoid. Another very common habit is being slightly manipulative. So in other words,
mhm.
working with people and not really explaining what your intentions are, your complete motivation, having a hidden agenda, that kind of thing will undermine trust.
Mm,
Um, Language for effect. Okay, when you say something, it's got to be accurate, and it's got to take other people's feelings into account. And
mhm.
language for effect is where when you say something, what you're trying to do is make other people think in a certain way or do things. Okay. All of these things are going to undermine trust.
Mm.
And my first thoughts on the question are that in order to establish and grow people's trust in you, you've really got to be clean. You've got to avoid all these nasty habits that are very easy to fall into because you're under so much pressure and so on. You want to get things done quickly, and that's where we can end up. And usually to be clean in the sense I've just described, it's difficult because you have to sacrifice a little bit. You have to show a bit of vulnerability. You have to say you can't do things. You can't cover up very much. It reminds me of the old Greek saying, which is, in order to lead a virtuous life, first you must become very rich.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And when you're not very rich, actually being virtuous actually comes at a cost. It can be very uncomfortable sometimes, but it's what you need for people to trust you.
I think when you talk about rich in this case, or when you're talking about, how to earn trust, and it's hard, you're not just talking about, in this case, not just literally money, but are you self-assured? Can you stand up for what you believe, even if it's going to take time for people to realize what you're doing is the right thing? And trust, like Rome, was not built in a day. It takes time.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's what you're trying to say, that you need to be strong. And not everyone can afford to be strong. So going back to even the previous question, you have a tribe, you have allies, you have strength from within, you have strength from outside. All of this is necessary key ingredients when you're managing up, across, in every different direction. I think that's what it's sounding like. But you're totally, I have to agree, without trust, you can move forward. And
I do think it's quite linked to the subject of vulnerability. If you've read, Brené Brown has got a lot to say on that. If you, at some point, you're going to be, your reputation is on the line, and it's only if you're prepared to, come clean and be a little bit vulnerable that you'll be in a position to gain trust. If you avoid revealing stuff, if you try and hide things and so on, you're going down the wrong route. And so it's not at all comfortable being, showing that you don't understand things, that you don't feel good about X, Y, Z. Those feelings of vulnerability are not very comfortable at all.
I see. And we do have one more question here, but before we get to that, talking about being vulnerable and showing a soft side in our day and age in corporate, whether it be the US or Europe or even other parts of the world, might not be necessarily viewed positively by most people. I'm not saying all. I personally think it's great strength when you are vulnerable. It takes great courage and strength to be able to show that. How do you advise people to do two things: be vulnerable, but also put it in a way that is productive? You got to be able to do that. And you can't just be a negative person spewing negativity, but how do you show you're vulnerable and in the process seeking help and helping others? I'll take a pause.
Well, the word that comes to mind is meta communication, which is spend a bit of time explaining what you're doing. So meta communication, I like to compare it with metadata. People don't know what metadata is. I mean, it's data about data. Meta communication is communication about communication. So if you're not sure about the way people will understand what you're about to say, meta communicating, first of all, in other words, explaining explicitly what you're intending, is a good idea. Otherwise, you'll be misunderstood by definition. So metacom is just practicing doing that kind of thing is well worthwhile. So, again, I come back to the idea that if you develop a vocabulary for the different postures you're going to adopt, for example, then you can say so. If you've got no words to put to it, then you're stuck. So reading a few books, and acquiring a certain vocabulary that you can use in order to not just say stuff that's directly related to a question somebody asks you a question, okay, and you can answer the question. But meta communication means explaining before you answer the question how you intend to do it, okay? And you need a vocabulary to do that. You need a way of doing that, and it just takes a bit of practice.
It sounds very systematic. It seems it increases the confidence level of getting to where you need to go.
Yeah.
Right. You could either push against a wall, or you can actually have rocket boosters and get you there faster. So I think this is what it is. We do have one more question in chat. I want to get to that. What specific actions and behavior will show your management that you're not just a good problem solver or IC, but have the potential for a leader? I think this is pretty profound.
I think the thing you were suggesting earlier on is the questioning thing that's really going to help. I really think that when things get difficult, your reaction is to question your leadership, to understand why those decisions were being made, and get the information that allows you to contribute at their level. Then you start to show potential for leadership. It's not by being an excellent widget maker that people will promote you to be a manager of widget makers. It's by showing that you've understood the problem at the management level, and you can, it's a questioning approach. It's respect for and interest in the job that they do that will make them think of you as one of them, kind of thing. So a questioning attitude is really, really important to that kind of thing.
From what I'm hearing, it's questioning with the intent to understand from a different vantage view. If you're a widget maker, engineer, software programmer, you're looking at, how did this code get into production, or how did this hardware get taped out, so on and so forth. But are you viewing it from a different angle in terms of not just how the business is run, how are the different teams and individuals coming together to actually getting that end goal out? And if you're asking questions to understand how the factory works, I think that then puts you in a position to, is that correct?
Yeah, you have to show, that's right. You have to show genuine curiosity in the business, the next level up. When I do come across in coaching quite a lot of people that feel very stuck because they can't get promoted, even though they're excellent at their jobs. But it literally is that. If you're an excellent widget maker, what will happen is people will make you stay there because they need excellent widget makers. They won't promote them because they're losing out by doing that. No, you've got to be genuinely curious about the job at the next level up and want to do it, and therefore use the opportunities of talking with your managers to find out more about that. That will take you naturally into that space, I think.
Yeah, I think that itself is another topic to have, which is the art of asking questions. I'm just started on that journey. Wouldn't it be nice to get better at it? I'm cheating whenever I can and trying to throw questions whenever possible, but I think it's already made a huge difference. And what maybe, the last 2 minutes, maybe final advice on managing up? I know that question maybe on that or something else. What would you like to leave as parting notes to the people?
Well, the thing I'd like to finish on is this thing about how you measure success in managing up. I think that's really important. I think people think they're not working it out. They don't understand it. They're not doing it properly because they're not getting what they want immediately. But they may actually be doing a lot better than they think, because a sincere attempt to manage up, influence people above you, can also have a very positive impact on your relationship with them. And if that's all you achieve, it's still pretty good. So set yourself reasonable goals. You know, if you don't get everything, every tangible thing that you set out to, that's not necessarily a sign that you're not doing a good job of managing up.
I see. Look for those victories and pile those up whenever it does come. Yeah, I think we have less than a minute. I do want to, thank everyone for joining the call. First of all, thank you, Andy, for taking all these questions, going through the survey. The article was very useful. Your postures are very helpful in articulating, having that communication. So I think that is great. I'm just floored by the support of people joining on the call. And I'm hoping that this continues. Stay tuned. We try to do this once a month. If you have questions or comments on what other topics Andy and I should talk about, please let us know. And also, if there are other questions that intrigued you that didn't show up right now, but do later on, feel free to connect with me and Andy. We'll be there to answer your questions. And you will receive a survey. Please, respond in that if you can as well. And as always, 3 random participants will get a $10 gift certificate. So stay tuned for that. You might be lucky. If you weren't lucky last time, stay tuned for that this time around. Anything else, Andy? Comments to the
No, just
thanks
very much. Thanks very much to you, Suraj, for organizing all this. You did a fantastic job. And thank you very much to the audience for coming along, because we get at least as much out of this as you do, and we just couldn't do it if we didn't have an audience asking us questions. And just being present, just your presence helps us enormously. We feed off of that. So thank you all very much. Have a nice evening or morning or wherever you are in the world, and look forward to the next one.
Yeah, thank you. And the recording will be posted, and the link will be on LinkedIn or in many other ways will be shared with the people who are on the call. Awesome. Right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, morning, rest of your day. Take care.
Cheers. Bye-bye.